Chapter 10 of the Hampstead Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. The Hampstead Mystery by John Watson and Arthur Rees. Chapter 10. And so you had no luck, Rolfe? Inspector Chippenfield, glancing up from his official desk in Scotland Yard, put this question in a tone of voice which suggested that the speaker had expected nothing better. "I've seen the heads of at least half a dozen likely West End shops," Rolfe replied, "and they tell me there is nothing to indicate where the handkerchief was bought. The scrap of lace merely shows that it was torn off a good handkerchief, but there is nothing about it to show that the handkerchief was different in any marked way from the average filmy scrap of muslin and lace which every smart woman carries as a handkerchief. I thought so myself before I started to make inquiries." "Well, Rolfe, we must come at it another way," said the inspector. "Undoubtedly there is a woman in the case, and it ought not to be impossible to locate her. Your theory, Rolfe, is that the murder was committed by someone who broke into the place while Sir Horace was entertaining a lady friend, or waiting for the arrival of a lady he expected. Either the lady had not arrived or had left the room temporarily when the burglar broke into the house. He had spotted the place some days before and ascertained that it was empty, and when he found that Sir Horace had returned alone he decided to break in and, covering Sir Horace with a revolver, try to extort money from him. A riskier but more profitable game than burgling in an empty house, if it came off. With his revolver in his hand he made his way up to the library. Sir Horace parleyed with him until he could reach his own revolver, and then got in the first shot but missed his man. The burglar shot him and then bolted. The lady heard the shots and, rushing in, found Sir Horace in his death agony. She was stooping over him with her handkerchief in her hand, and in his convulsive moments he caught hold of a corner of it and the handkerchief was torn. The lady left the place and, on arrival home, concocted the letter which was sent here telling us that Sir Horace had been murdered. Is that it?" "Yes," assented Rolfe. "Of course, I don't lay it down that everything happened just as you've said, but that's my idea of the crime. It accounts for all the clues we've picked up, and that is something." "It is an ingenious theory, and it does you credit," said the inspector, who had not forgotten that he had proposed to Rolfe that they should help one another to the extent of taking one another fully into each other's confidence for the purpose of getting ahead of Crewe. "But you have overlooked the fact that it is possible to account in another way for all the clues we have picked up. Suppose Sir Horace's return from Scotland was due to a message from a lady friend. Suppose the lady went to see him, accompanied by a friend whom Sir Horace did not like, a friend of whom Sir Horace was jealous. Suppose they asked for money, blackmail, and there was a quarrel in which Sir Horace was shot. Then we have your idea as to how the lady's handkerchief was torn. I agree with that in the main. The lady and her friend fled from the place. Later in the night the place is burgled by someone who has had his eye on it for some time, and on entering the library he is astounded to find the dead body of the owner. Suppose he went home and, on thinking things over, sent the letter to Scotland Yard with the idea that if the police got on to his tracks about the burglary the fact that he had told us about the murder would show he had nothing to do with killing Sir Horace." "That is a good theory, too," said Rolfe in a meditative tone. And the only person who can tell us which is the right one is Sir Horace's lady friend. The problem is to find her." "Right," said the inspector approvingly. "And while you have been making inquiries at the shops about the handkerchief, I have been down to the Law Courts branch of the Equity Bank where Sir Horace kept his account. It occurred to me that a look at Sir Horace's account might help us. You know the sort of man he was. You know his weakness for the ladies. But he was careful. I looked through his private papers out at Riversbrook, expecting to get on the track of something that would show someone had been trying to blackmail him over an entanglement with a woman. But I found nothing. I couldn't even find any feminine correspondence. If Sir Horace was in the habit of getting letters from ladies, he was also in the habit of destroying them. No doubt he adopted that precaution when his wife was alive, and found it such a wise one that he kept it up when there was less need for it. But a weakness for the ladies costs money, Rolfe, as you know, and that is why I had a look at his banking account. He made some payments that it would be worth while to trace, payments to Western drapers and that sort of thing. Of course, Sir Horace, being a cautious man and occupying a public position, might not care to flaunt his weakness in the eyes of Western shopkeepers, and instead of paying the accounts of his lady friend of the moment, may have given her the money and trusted to her paying the bills. A thing that women of that kind are never in a hurry to do. In that case the payments to Western shopkeepers are for goods supplied to his daughter. However, I've taken a note of the names, dates and amounts of a number of them, and I want you to see the managers of these shops." "We are getting close to it now," said Rolfe approvingly. "I think so," was the modest reply of his superior. "There is one thing about Sir Horace's account which struck me as peculiar. Every 4 weeks for the past 8 months Sir Horace drew a cheque for £24, and every cheque of the kind was made payable to number 365. Now, unless he wished to hide the nature of the transaction from his bankers, why not put in the cheque in the name of the person who received the money? It couldn't have been for his personal use, for in that case he would have made the cheque payable to self. Besides, a man with a banking account doesn't draw a regular £24 every 4 weeks for personal expenses. He draws a cheque just when he wants a few pounds, instead of carrying £5 notes about with him. I asked the bank manager about these cheques, and he looked up a couple of them and found they had been cashed over the counter. So he called up the cashier, and from him I learnt that Sir Horace came in and cashed them. As far as he can remember, Sir Horace cashed all these £24 cheques. I assume he did so because he realised that there was less likely to be comment in the bank than if a well-dressed, good-looking young lady arrived at the bank with them. This £24 a month suggests that Sir Horace had something choice and not too expensive stowed away in a flat. That is a matter on which Hill ought to be able to throw some light. If he knows anything I'll get it out of him. It struck me as extraordinary that Sir Horace should have taken Hill into his service knowing what he was, but this apparently is the explanation. He knew that Hill wouldn't gossip about him for fear of being exposed, for that would mean that Hill would lose his situation and would find it impossible to get another one without a reference from him. We'll have Hill brought here." There was a knock at the door and a boy in buttons entered and handed Inspector Chippenfield a card. "Selden from Hampstead," he explained to Rolfe. "Don't go away yet. It may be something about this case." Police Inspector Selden entered the office and held the door ajar for a man behind.